I would not describe that I decided to write this book. It was, in a way, woven in my life story. When I was 24 years old, Jesus appeared to me in a splash of light in my room before I went to bed. And he just said 2 sentences to me and disappeared. And that changed my life, because I did not believe in any religion. I grew up Catholic. And it was these days really, a challenging conversation. I said, excuse me, we have a problem here, I first do not believe in you, and second, I don't believe in God, because after all my experience with Catholic education and this dogma that I have met there, I decided I better don't believe in anything. But it changed my life. And on that day, for 2 weeks, I was like in a state of, I would call it, I felt like a bottle filled with pink champagne bubbling, I felt so much love, I felt so much unity, and that convinced me in a way. So I asked for questions, and I had miracles going on these days. Because one night in these days, me really questioning and asking for answers, something pulled me on my heart chakra, which I had already one event before in my life, and it took me into the subway of Vienna, where was a little bookshop, and like magnetically drawn into one row of these books, I pulled one book. And it was called, it was a book about Jesus, and I bought it, and I went home and I opened the book, and the book talked about that we live in the age of Aquarius, and they know that there is an age of Pisces, and now it comes to an end, which in a way is covers a long time of humanity, I think, I don't know the numbers anymore, but it's really long, like 25,000. I'm not good in numbers. And I've never heard things like that before, I was a normal girl. I went to discotheques, I went out, I was a student. But something in me suddenly knew that is true, and I was reading truth, I deeply believe that we have like a sensor inside. When we read or see truth, we know it, I trust in that. So I agreed, I made an agreement with Jesus. And so my life started from there on a spiritual journey through highlights and very deep darkness. And I had to walk it. I sometimes say, if I would have known that, I would have said no, But it took me many, 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 many years. And I still not good in numbers, but many years later, about 20 years later, I had a walk in South France, and I love to walk in the nature. And I came to one of those hills nearby here, where we are right now, where we are in South France. And I was sitting there under a tree on top of the hill, and it was like a curtain would go open, and I would see Jesus sitting there and preaching. And few people were sitting to his feet. And I came back and I thought, Jesus was not in South France. What is that, And I called Agni these days, my teacher and my friend, and we have been doing Akashic readings together for a long time. I discovered through him that I have the ability, very naturally, to go to the Akasha. What is the Akasha? Many people may ask. The Akasha is the computer of the universe. Like the big, 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 big computer of the universe where everything is stored. The past, what's now, and the future. So I don't know how, but I have a natural talent, which I may have developed in former lives, but I brought it with me, that when Agni leads me there, I read like in a book, you know. It's like I open a page in a library and I read a book. So we did soul readings for people, Akashic readings for people, and I called Agni and he didn't say anything, and 2 days later he calls me and said, have a look, you know, they just published a book, and this book was Dan Brown's, you know, first the, what is it called, The Bloodline, you know, do you know Dan Brown's book? Sorry, I'm not good at titles too. But anyhow, and I read the first time about the bloodline in South France and the proof that they believed that they came to South France. So pause again, you know, pause again. 2 years later, I was sitting in a meditation and Jesus came back to me. He never came back in all those years, you know. He just left me walking, maybe watching over me, and he put me a book into my lap and he said, go and write my real story. You have been there from the beginning to the end. Me without any memory of that, me without any knowing. So I went to Agni again and he said, well, then let's have a look, you know, and he guided me through the Akasha. And I remember like yesterday, I opened this first book, you know, this book, you can imagine, it's like a book, it's an etherical book, you know, and I can read there, and I just read the book and start to speak what's written in the book, you know, and I said, I remember the first time I met him, and I spoke within 1 hour about 20 pages, you know, about how I was a little girl and I was in an ethnic community, and that how my father lived, and we lived in Jerusalem, and we were not with the real community, we were living outside Qumran, the ethnic community, and that I could see the colors of the people, the aura of the people, and I was just reading and reading and reading, and it was like, while reading, I started to remember what I did not remember. I did not invent that because, you know, you cannot invent something like that. So within 2 weeks, we had done the whole book. The book was spoken down, me reading the lines. And that was Jesus the Book, the first volume of the series that is now 3 volumes. After all those years, we did not change a word. The book was just revised and we published it. While reading the book, I tapped into 2 different things that we have been told. First, that Mary Magdalene, no, maybe even more. Mary Magdalene was not his whore, she was his lover, you know, his deepest lover. She was his wife. And in this book they didn't get married yet, you know. And what it also was that we were women around Jesus, and I was not the only one. We were many. Mary had an education, you know, a spiritual education, and we had a lot of spiritual educations. There were Ascending Masters, you know, that were women, and there was a story of woman unwrapping behind that, what I was reading, which was not known to me either. And the third thing is, when I came to the scene where Jesus crucified, you know, we all walked, and I was there, you know, we all who were around Jesus, we suffered it through, you know. Jesus came to us and he delivered to us what expects him, and we were all suffering. And so I walked through that whole thing where we pushed ourselves through the crowds that were so cruel. And we pushed ourselves there where we saw him, you know, carrying the cross, you know, his last steps, and we watched him really nailed on that cross, not knowing what's going, and be sure that we are losing him. And our heart was broken, my heart was broken. But what I did not know, and through reading that book, he did not die there. A plan that was not even revealed to us who were so close to Jesus was that made by Assanes and Joseph of Arimathea and Simon, who was my husband in this life, that they had made a plan B in case it happens. And they had instructed a friend who was a Roman soldier that he would declare him dead, so we could take him from the cross and save him, because before his whole life was distinguished. So I was just retelling and rewatching that scene, even not knowing what expecting me, even if I have lived that in a former life. And it turned out that the sponge that was given to him was, in a way, a medicine that would take somebody into a coma, because the Essenes had secret knowledges that they could stop the breath for a while, but there's a limited time, and so there had to be very measured actions be taken to take him from the cross, declare him from dead, bring him to the grave, and revive him, bring him back to his life. So that was book number 1. And after that I started to research. You know, I started to be like Sherlock Holmes, you know. I did my Sherlock Holmes work, and I really went through all those details, and I said, they declared him after so few hours dead. It's not normal. People have to be on the cross for days to die, you know. It suddenly all made sense to me. And we published that book. And people started to read it, and that was the beginning of all that. And if people said, how can you be so sure? I said, I don't know. But this is what I saw, this is what I experienced it, because, you know, what gives me confidence, I do not know what's happening in the next scene. It just comes through the re-breaking of a memory that I remember. And the images are so clear, it's like a movie. I'm watching a movie again. And people said, you know, but this could be a fantasy. I said, who cares? Try, you know, feel it in your heart. If it's true for you, then it's true. If not, it does not matter, you know. I had to do that. So the book ended at a certain point, and it was clear that the story would continue, because the book ends where we embark the sea, and Jesus we have to leave Palestine. After all that story, we had to leave, and I remember that we embarked to go to a foreign country, and Mary Magdalene was on board, and many of us, and Jesus went to the Himalayas. So about 2 years later, I knew I needed to continue that story, you know. And we started to read again, and there again something very unexpected happened. One unexpected happened to me. Through a tunnel of light, I landed there, you know, in a scene where I recognized myself sitting in a castle, and we are waiting to be burned, you know. And suddenly in my memory I said, oh my God, you know, I remember the story of the Cathars, and suddenly I was in the middle there, you know. We were waiting to be burned because we were the last Cathars, you know. And that was a shock for me, you know. That whole scene was like, it really burst me apart, and And I couldn't read for a while because that was so dramatic and so cruel for my soul. I couldn't do it for a while. But we decided to go back, in the reading, and I started to read the story, a complete different story again. That we, the last Cathars, knew that we were the higher heirs of the people of the Assamese who once came to South France, and we have managed to trade, our teachings until the 12th century, until the moment came, where the invaders and the crusaders came, and they have been waiting in front of our castle in Montségur, and one day it was clear we couldn't do it any longer, and we went to the flames. But this would not open in the book. It just started where we are waiting and remembering who we really are, and that we have saved the Holy Grail, and that we needed to save it, and we managed to, to find a path, the secret path in Montségur, and give it to the Templars who were our friends. And we know who we are. We know our secret books, which we had still. And we saved them. We saved them. That we knew they were not meant to be given to those enemies in front of our gates who awaited our death with hatred we have never seen before. So we had to save them or burn them. And so I tell the whole story, and suddenly the scene had a cut to, and I was back in Jesus' times. In the times where we landed in South France, where we on the boat and we land there, and how we found a way, into the country, because Joseph of Arimathea had a house there, and that was our shelter, and how we walked through the days and nights for 2 days to find that. And I continued to tell the story. A story of us, being landed after all what has happened, far away from our home, lonely there, to be protected, to save our lives, to find a place that would shelter us. And I tell the story of Mary Magdalene, who was already pregnant, and I had a son already, and it's a story of woman who finds their way through their broken life, and they make the best out of it. So I keep telling that story, and I also keep telling the story that in those days, Mary Magdalene and me, we prayed him back. We prayed him back. We reached out with our souls into the Himalayas and said, look, Mother Mary Magdalene gave birth to a little girl, and I remember myself there, telling him, look, there's your little girl, you have to come back. And then in my memories it happens. Jesus came back one day, he stood there, very etherical. He had already gone, into the other realms. He was that master who was completely walking on earth and not be on earth anymore. And he came back. Our prayers, our woman prayers had taken him back, and there the story starts again. That we come there and we decide to be there, and people from Palestine, more people come, many Assamese come. Jesus guides them to build a new community, and the Assamese built a new community in a foreign country where most of the people were Celts or peasants, and the Romans were there. We were in the middle of Romans, where we had to hide from, and so in there we built little nests, to protect who we are and ourselves. And I tell a story that from there slowly a new life evolved, and Jesus